got it?
Yeah, so we looks like our lavaliers are working as intended. Catch boxes, still not sure. Could you run the catch boxes one more time, John?
Catchbox 9, nothing.
Okay. So yeah, we're not getting catch boxes. Do you want me to just switch them to handhelds? Yeah.
What's that?
I see. Okay.
Now I'm getting it.
You getting it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Catch box is down. This.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. We're going to start the session now. Hello and welcome. Hello. Hey. Yeah. I'll do this. Good afternoon. Hello and welcome. Welcome. We are going to start now. Thank you all for your attention. We're having some minor technical. We're having some technical difficulties here. If I could have your attention, please. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you. We're having some minor technical difficulties here with the microphone, so I'm going to be uniquely located here for the first moments, and then we will invite our guests. Good people, thank you. We begin now. It's Unit 2, still Week 2, Unit 2. Tonight, our topic, labor systems and monopsony power, specifically a focus building on what we learned about platform economies and business models in Unit 1. That microphone sounds now that it's coming on a little louder. Is this one on now too? Maybe not. Just this one. Both of them are on. Their feedback. We'll see how it goes. Building on what you learned in Unit 1, we're coming back to the topic and spiraling forward on that here for Unit 2. Again, it's labor systems, monopsony power. Our guest, Arun Sundararajan, I'll introduce you here momentarily. We've spoken about what we've learned and read so far. So the idea is that indeed we're building on that and building toward next week, the final week in Unit 2 on media systems. The topic, again, Now I gotta step out away from the podium. I can't stand it. The design of this unit is to give you a tour of these global systems that structure the relationship between business and society. You're now 3 weeks into this Unit 2, focusing on your own topics. Again, the stuff that you're writing on, you've chosen to write on for the Unit 2, and then for the Unit 3 paper. The idea is whatever you're writing on, the question of labor systems should be relevant to you, at least tangentially, at least indirectly. The rise, particularly as we're talking about it tonight, of artificial intelligence threatening to disrupt all kinds of things, labor markets of various kinds here and around the world. So my hope is that you will all benefit greatly. Professor Arun Sundararajan, our guest tonight, our colleague here in the building, again, one of the world's experts on this. I chose this picture of you there on with some chyron on some news program. You're there from time to time. You're here with us tonight. Folks, please join me in welcoming Arun Sundararajan to the stage.
Thanks. How are you guys doing? I'm happy that you're in here rather than in Washington. Today is the day that everybody goes to Washington Square Park. It's like the first warm day. I also noticed that like my smaller classes, all the front rows are empty. So, but I'll survive. I'm not going to take it personally. So I want to talk to you guys about two things. I want to talk about platforms and I want to talk about artificial intelligence. If you think about the industrial system that characterized the late 19th century and most of the 20th century, it started with the creation of the telegraph, then railroads, the invention of the telephone. Then along came electricity and the internal combustion engine, which led to mass production and mass distribution. And so the 20th century economy was organized around these things we call firms, traditional organizations, what your parents probably worked at, what they aspire that you will go and join. They have managers. These managers have associates. These associates have analysts. There's a hierarchy. Business schools exist in part to train these managers. And within that system, the balance of power between labor and the larger organization has been recognized for a long time, or the imbalance of power. The most famous book about this was Karl Marx's Capital, which was probably the first book to make the point that when you centralize the holding of capital, you increase inequality. So if a few people hold a lot of capital and the rest of the economy is just providing labor in exchange for wages, inequality goes up. This is a point I'll come back to. But early in the 20th century, a journalist called Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle. This was investigative journalism. He pretended to be a laborer, and I think in 1904, 1905, worked in the meatpacking district of Chicago, and wrote this book, which people still read, like 120 years later, about the horrific working conditions of labor. And that was a trigger in many ways that led to a whole host of changes in various economies, including the United States, that tried to sort of correct the imbalance of power between the firm, the centralized organization that held the capital, and labor that was supplying labor in exchange for wages. Different governments created different protection systems, like child labor was banned, 8-hour workday, paid vacations. If you get hurt on the job, your company takes care of you. But different countries chose different models as well. In Denmark or in Sweden or in Norway, The government takes a vast majority of the responsibility for this safety net and this protection. In a country like the United States or UK or Japan, a lot of this protection is borne by some combination of the government doing something, but the company doing a bunch of things, and the individual also. So I pay my health insurance premium, my company pays some of that health insurance premium, and the government has a role where they're saying, well, like, if you can't afford health insurance, here's something for you, or here's Medicare. But it's a very different system from a lot of other countries, and this thing called the company, the employer, plays a very big role. Now, the reason why I bring this up, and the reason why I'm here, I didn't study, labor systems in the 20th century, but I have spent the last 10 or 15 years studying platforms. Some of you in my freshman class have already heard about platforms. But what the platform does, and you guys have heard about this before, it redistributes things between the center and the periphery in some sense. The traditional company, the employee is providing labor, wages, talent in exchange for wages. And the company is holding all the capital, not just the money, but the structural capital. They have the processes. They know how things are done. They train their employees, like, think about Marriott, a hotel chain. They've got a particular way of doing things. And then the labor sort of plugs in and provides labor and talent. This happens at an investment bank as well. Goldman Sachs holds the relationships, holds the structural capital. And high-paid sort of labor and talent go in and plug in. With platforms, that equation is changed a little. It's redistributed between the center and the periphery. There are different models where the individual now starts to become a little like a company. They are independent. They are, in some cases, only providing labor. In other cases, they are holding some structural capital. So let's look at 4 examples really quickly. I know you guys have already talked about Amazon. You talked about Amazon and the people who work for Amazon. Amazon also has a platform called Amazon Marketplace, through which 5 million sellers sell. You guys have bought stuff from Amazon Marketplace. You may not be aware of it. But they also have a platform called Amazon Mechanical Turk, in which I, for example, if I want to survey 100 people, I post it there and people respond. If I want to take a whole bunch of text and organize it and have people sort of look for nouns, look for verbs, look for particular phrases, I can post it there, and there's a whole distributed bunch of people who sort of will do this. Amazon Mechanical Turk is an example where there is no capital that has been decentralized to the providers. Right? They are just providing labor. They are faceless. They're anonymous. It's not like I'm picking this particular worker and saying, I want this person. I just post my job, and this like faceless pool of labor does it for me. And they're doing it on demand. Now, you contrast that with YouTube, which is another platform familiar to many of you. TikTok is similar in their relationship between the platform and the provider. Over here, the provider is, of course, expending their labor and their talent in creating their content, all these creators. But they're also building a bit of a brand, right? Some people have more subscribers than others. If you provide better content, more people will view. You can make more money advertising. So the power balance between YouTube and its creators is different. And YouTube's creators are holding a little more structural capital. Now, YouTube still controls the advertising channel. YouTube still owns the subscribers in a sense. So if you leave YouTube, you can't take your subscribers with you. YouTube holds those subscribers. And so it's not like being completely independent. There is still a power dynamic between the platform and the YouTube creator, but it's very different from Amazon Mechanical Turk. Airbnb is also different in that you are actually building a brand through your Airbnb reputation. If you provide better hosting, you will get higher ratings. If you learn from your customers and learn how to provide a better accommodation, you can charge a higher price. If you provide better customer service, more people will come back to you. All of these are parts of what we call structural capital, They are the things that used to be held by the company in the 20th century that are now being divided between Airbnb and Airbnb hosts. There's a bunch of stuff that I learn as an Airbnb host about running a small business that is mine, that I can take to a different platform if I want. And so the power dynamic between Airbnb hosts and Airbnb is different from the power dynamic between Uber drivers and Uber. Right? And then you've got the App Store, where you've got app developers who are providing apps, and all of you have how many of you are iPhone users? So you've all downloaded an app from the App Store. It was built by a developer. Maybe you guys have gone to download particular apps because you've heard about them. Over here, this is a marketplace in which there's a very different division of structural capital. The developer could go and work for a company. The developer could develop for the Android platform. The developer could be doing some other software engineering work. Instead, the developer can choose to bring their product, develop it for the App Store, and provide it through the App Store. And so they are running a genuine small business through the App Store. The App Store is giving them access to customers. The App Store is making sure that the product seems, safe and goes through a whole bunch of reviews to make sure that it sort of doesn't do anything bad to your phone. So that's, again, a different power dynamic between the provider and the platform. So the point I'm getting to here is that in the 21st century, the things that we designed for the 20th century, assuming that people will be employed by companies, and the dynamic of power that we should worry about is between the employee and the employer, or between the laborer and the capital, has changed because we've got a whole bunch of different ways in which people are bringing their labor and talent to a large market, but with different degrees of independence and different divisions of structural capital between the center, which is the platform, and the periphery, which is the providers. Does that make sense? All of you nod now. Yes, it makes sense. Great, thank you. So this is part of a trend. Not all of these are platform entrepreneurs or platform workers. But at this point, almost half of the US workforce earns all or part of their income through something other than employment. They either are running small businesses, they're freelancing, doing some kind of independent work. Not all of their income, all or part. A lot of them are part-time independent workers. But this number has doubled in the last 5 years. And so the future of work is not employment. The future of work are these kind of semi-independent relationships between individuals who hold some capital and platforms. And the question now is, how do we make sure that there isn't an imbalance that raises inequality? How do we make sure that there's a balance that lowers inequality and spreads the wealth? Okay, and that we'll get to in the discussion. All right, so I want to spend 5 minutes talking about generative AI, and then we'll get into the discussion. You've all used generative AI. None of you have used generative AI for your papers for this course, of course. But you've all used ChatGPT. You know what this is. Some of you have produced. How many of you have produced art on an AI system, like DALL-E or ChatGPT? How many of you have written code using an AI system? Okay, so you know what generative AI is. It is an artificial intelligence system that produces new and original content based on patterns and examples learnt from existing data. So it looks at what humans have created, massive amounts of it. Pretty much everything that's ever been written has been used to train these systems, and it has learned patterns. It has used these examples. And generative AI is now creating completely new content. Some of you know this, many of you don't, but every word that comes out of ChatGPT is generated on the fly. It's not pulling something from a website the way that Google search does. Every word is new and original content, and it's generating. Okay? Now, that's the positive story. There's like an enormous fraction of human knowledge that seems to have been encapsulated and put into this gigantic system that we now all have access to. which seems really exciting, right? But there's a potentially darker side, which is that the same technology can also replicate the style or creative process of any particular individual or institution. So if there's a magazine that publishes in a particular style, the generative AI system can learn how to write like that magazine, can learn how to paint like Picasso, can learn how to compose music like Taylor Swift, can learn how to write like you or me. Okay? So it's not just general human knowledge, it's this ability to replicate us. In some ways, it's a technology that can create an AI twin or a digital twin of any particular individual. Now, if you think about it, AI twins aren't really new. There are preference twins of yours sitting at every platform that serves you advertising. These twins have been trained on every click, every time you glance at your phone, how fast or slow you scroll, whether you stop and linger on particular pages, every time you raise your phone, the attention that you're paying to it, potentially like heartbeat from your, these signals are getting richer and richer every year, right? They are. And when they do, your preference twin gets increasingly, accurate. It becomes an increasingly perfect replica of you and your preferences. You don't know this thing exists, but it knows more about you than perhaps you even are consciously aware of yourself. And that's today. Your preference twins already are sitting in these platforms. Tomorrow, your employer might create an AI twin of yours, trained on your memos, trained on your emails, trained on your Slack messages. You might even welcome the creation of this AI twin. It'll draft memos in your style, so you don't have to actually do the writing. If you go on vacation, maybe there'll be a chatbot version of you that your colleagues can ask questions to. And so while you might embrace it initially, the question that comes up is, suppose you leave your job and go and work for another company. Will your AI twin stay behind? And if you fast forward a little further, will your AI twin compete with you for a job, a few years down the road? This sounds like science fiction, but it's actually a part of the reality that we're living in with today's technology. There are AI twins of me. And a lot of people think of it as a copyright and intellectual property problem. There are hundreds of lawsuits about training generative AI systems on copyrighted data. Those will be resolved through something called fair use. I'm not going to talk about that today, although I'm happy to talk about it anytime you guys want, sort of one-on-one. But the point I'm getting to is that the resolution of is training an AI system on copyrighted data fair use or not isn't going to solve the deeper problem. That's a separate problem. That's one that'll be resolved. The deeper problem, the one that is sort of more scary in some sense, is that we have lost control in some ways over our human capital. We might, I'm speaking to you now. I, as a human, am generating data, and you are being trained with this data. So some people might say, well, how is, training an AI system any different? But the ability for someone to create an AI replica of you is currently not under your control. All your output can be taken to sort of create an approximation of you. Is this going to compete with you for your job? That's not the point. The point is that the circles around human capital, have changed. And much like structural capital, or who holds the capital, determines inequality or not in the 20th century industrial economy and is a central question for platforms, the circle around who holds our human capital and do we have control over our human capital is going to be central to whether generative AI is going to empower labor or is going to disenfranchise labor and talent. Because you can imagine a world in which, with access to this vast store of human knowledge, I can go out and be an entrepreneur. I have access to all of this digitized talent, and it empowers me. Like, maybe there'd be millions of people who are creating businesses, running, sort of little finance practices, consulting practices, hedge funds, marketing companies. But if I can't draw a clear line around the human capital that I have acquired, if I'm giving it away to the AI system as I'm using it, we might have the opposite, right? Like, we may end up in a world where all of the innovation comes from a generative AI system, and the role of humans is to generate enough training data for this system so that the system keeps improving. I think of this as like the Matrix-like world. Some of you have seen the movie The Matrix, you know what I'm talking about. There's no clear policy answer, but I think the 19th and 20th centuries, a lot of the discussion around labor power and sort of monopsony had to do with the institution versus the individual. And a lot of economists studied the key role of holding financial capital or structural capital. In the 21st century with AI, human capital has also entered this equation. And the question for us is, beyond the question of what does it mean to be human if you're not you don't own your human capital. But a key question that comes up is, or a key difference is that human capital also enters the mix as one of the forms of capital whose distribution and whose ownership is going to shape the power of the individual versus the power of the institution. All right, let me stop there.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you, Arun.
I always feel very special when I'm sitting in one of these chairs. We've had the same chairs for 10 years, I think.
And it's the same naga hide or
Yeah.
whatever. It's not, for those of you,
Yeah.
there we go. So what I want to do is pose a few kind of follow-up questions, and it's structural capital in the platform. There's some themes that we've all been through with respect to Amazon that I want to pick up on.
Okay.
And then the kind of digital twins and kind of how that will play out maybe in different fields, like the disciplines that people are here to study and the fields that they want to enter. And maybe then we get into some of the policy options that could be sort of discussed or advanced to address those the potential inequity or inequality that would result in those fields or broadly. What I would say, as I've said before in this context, if any of you have any kind of clarification questions, just a simple wait a minute, I'm not sure what he's talking about kind of thing, you can raise your hand at any time. So I'll try to call you, and then we'll go more or less until 5:10 or so, and then it'll be the floor for Q&A. So that's our plan. But just to kind of get it started and to put it in maybe a pithy phrase, again, to try to connect with the things that everybody in the room is working on, even though we're working in different directions. Is it fair to say that the AI race between and among the big tech firms is an effort to establish monopoly power or control over dominant AI systems, and that the effect of that monopoly control would be to set up a monopsony over labor? Is that an oversimplification or marketing confections, and I'm trying to boil it down in ways that
Well, it's a possible outcome.
Yeah.
I don't know enough to know if this is a conscious plan, that there is in fact a strategy that is unfolding here. I think that there's as some of my students who are here know, because we've talked about this in my other class, platforms have a tendency to get big, and because you have more people on one side, you've got more value to the other side, and vice versa. If you don't want 20 Airbnbs, you want the host to be somewhere where the guests are. You want the developers to be where the app consumers are. You want the sellers to be where the buyers are. And so there is much more of a race to dominance dynamic in that kind of platform world. Thus far, what we've seen with generative AI is that that dynamic isn't yet playing out. Someone is calling me, and I'm gonna turn off my phone. Turn off your phone, guys. It's and here's the thing. I mean, yeah, he's objecting to the fact that I didn't defend Facebook more aggressively. See, you already have a number of competitors who are of comparable quality with sort of language-based generative AI, right? Some of you use ChatGPT, some of you use Claude, some of you use DeepSeek now, some of you use Gemini. And the gaps between these companies are shrinking. They've all got different user bases from which they're generating additional training data. Like they're all trained on the same corpus of everything on the internet, all the published books. But Google's getting it from Google users. Llama, which is Meta's AI system, which is the fifth competitor, they're getting it from Instagram and Facebook. They get sort of interaction from them. Anthropic, which is Claude's parent, has Amazon's a big funder of them, so the retail users of Amazon will probably sort of provide input. OpenAI is trying to build its own user base, but they've also got Microsoft as a partner and all of Microsoft's. So it actually feels a lot more competitive at this moment than some of the platform, or let me phrase that carefully. I mean, it actually seems a lot less likely to end with a winner-take-most kind of outcome than a traditional sort of two-sided platform where once you've got all the suppliers, all the buyers come to you and vice versa. As to whether this is something, this is a plan for them to then sort of sort of extract out of us all of our sort of human capital. I'm pretty sure that's not the plan. But in an economic system, like in a political economy like ours, the incentive of companies is, with whatever sort of guardrails are around them, to pursue profit, to pursue shareholder value. That's certainly one of the objectives. You guys know that it's not the only objective, but it's certainly one of them. And so if we are drifting towards a system where people are losing control over their human capital and it's getting more and more centralized, we can't just look to the companies to change their ways. This is where intervention is necessary in order to correct this market imperfection. But I'm not sure yet whether it is sufficiently imperfect, but I see the threat of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so and get the policy here.
Yeah.
Let me though go back to structural capital in platforms. In your analysis, your setup for the analysis of those four different systems with different distributions of structural capital. One of the words that you were using in the framing was inequality.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll hold that in mind for a second. Just now you were talking about in the traditional two-sided platform market, there would be a tendency toward greater consolidation in the market. So again, everybody in this room, we all spent 4 or 5 weeks talking about Amazon, right? And so the notion that Amazon basically, and it was Sabeel Rahman's paper, who read, framing Amazon's success as are we still microphone testing? My green light is on down here. It went off. It could be a battery thing. I haven't touched it. So that could be maybe a thing. Sorry for we've got tech difficulties.
But we,
but
I can still, I think they can all still hear you.
yeah, but it's the people watching online. They
I
might
see,
not be
okay.
able to hear this. Now we're getting it.
Yeah.
Sorry. So Rahman and Thalen arguing that the alignment of stakeholder interests in the success of Amazon as platform is between patient capital investors and consumers, right? So consumers get cheap stuff fast, I love my prime, the patient capital investors who were willing to take, minimal returns for a couple of
20 years,
decades, now when the firm has established effective dominance as the by far the most dominant e-commerce platform in the United States, that alliance of stakeholder interests then comes at the expense, and we were talking about this before, of the warehouse workers. We had a couple of them sitting in these Naugahyde chairs a month or so ago, at the expense of the sellers into the marketplace who are then forced to pay the fulfillment by Amazon fees, all the ways in which those stakeholders are slightly shortchanged in the interest of investors and consumers. My question for you is it really so hard to imagine, or what would it look like? Could somebody compete with Amazon or develop a new app store or develop a new Airbnb platform that would have a different distribution of structural capital that would get buy-in from other stakeholders in a way that would actually make it competitive? I'm sort of asking you broadly about Lina Khan's, alleged, the FTC's prosecution on antitrust. Are they illegitimately or illegally manipulating the marketplace, or they're just happen to build a better mousetrap, and if somebody comes along and does an e-commerce platform that aligns those stakeholder interests more effectively, then they'll beat Amazon, and that's the story of capitalism?
Yeah, I think that it's, this blurring of lines between how do we protect labor and how do we give labor enough power so that wages reflect the value that is being created for the system, and what are things that, when should a government intervene to curb excessive market power in the antitrust sense? It's, I think there are two camps here. One who say, well, yeah, we kind of see the connection. And the other camp which says, listen, antitrust has very little to do with, you're sort of using the cudgel of antitrust to get into a region where some other regulator should be paying attention. There's, I'll say two things here. One is that in general, a person who is a provider on a platform has less government. The government has done less to maintain their power because the government for the last 100 years has been focused on a different way of organizing economic activity, which involved the firm and the employee. So that was their assumption. Even if you think about, hey, I'm not working for a while, the government pays me money. The program is called unemployment. So for the double-digit percentage of people who never were employed, this is simply out of reach, right? That's just one example. The funding of a lot of things come from the company, and we have not yet gotten to the point where we've ascertained how much responsibility should the platform have. Right, because if I'm a seller on Amazon and I'm a seller on eBay, or if I'm hosting on Airbnb, hosting on VRBO, driving for Uber, Lyft, delivering for DoorDash, it's not immediately clear that we should just take out employer from the law and put in platform, because the nature of the relationship is different, right? I think where government can do a good job, and this is what I talk about in the longer article that none of you have read.
They will for tomorrow or Wednesday.
Yeah. Are they generally sort of good about doing their readings?
The ones in my section, I'll give them some props. I feel pretty solid about it. No, that's pretty solid. I can't speak for everybody in the room, but the 20 in my section are doing really well, I'd say.
Okay. All right. Are you feeding it into ChatGPT and saying, summarize this and come up with 10 good questions for Professor Statler? Yeah. No, you're not doing that. Of course not.
They just digital twinned you. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, no. But here's the thing is that I think that there's fertile ground for governments to intervene in pushing platforms towards giving the providers more structural capital.
Yeah.
Because I think then in a free market system, you will naturally see lower inequality. I think what a lot of the pushback against platforms now isn't so much about the platforms and their power themselves. It's about the fact that this safety net that we've built over the last 100 years was designed for a different individual institution relationship. And so a lot of, like a YouTube creator doesn't have the same kind of safety net that an employee of NYU does. It's not because NYU is a nicer entity than YouTube. It's that the employment relationship has been thought about for 100 years. The systems have been designed around it. The YouTube creator has this amorphous dependence on YouTube, but it's not yet something that the legislators have done anything about in terms of saying, how do we protect this part of the workforce? But this part of the workforce is a big part of the workforce now, and to me that's like, that's the bigger question than saying, let's take antitrust and sort of extend in.
Yeah.
It's more about like, whatever the Labor Department is going to be, for the next 3 years, sort of like, taking action. But we're not going to go there. So
Okay, well, so the legitimate application of antitrust law to the case of Amazon or other platforms, let's leave that aside for now and go actually to where you just were. Whether students are digital twinning themselves in my class.
yeah,
Okay, so 5 years ago, the whole question about AI and policy implications for labor, I think we were talking about autonomous vehicles, truck drivers, all the people. I mean, I think my memory then is like there's a certain significant percentage of U.S. states where driving is part of like a majority of jobs. So the idea that that would be a huge wholesale replacement of establishment of monopsony power for the firms that could run autonomous vehicles. And that, whether you'd be able to make a living in 50 years as a plumber, maybe, that kind of thing. Certain crafts, certain trades seem to be resilient to those dynamics. But what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years here in this building and in the buildings that employ Stern alumni is that it's not just manual labor or trade labor, it's knowledge workers. It's intellectuals who find themselves at risk of displacement. And so just to sort of go there, what's your sense of how, I'll just put it in terms that people should care about. What's the risk of monopsony power in the labor markets, the systems that Stern people recruit for? How worried should we be? If they're cheating in my class, well, that sucks. But like, if it's possible to legitimately cheat in my class, why wouldn't their digital twin get the job at Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, I mean, I often say in conversations like this that anybody who makes bold predictions about the capabilities of generative AI in 2 years doesn't understand generative AI, because you can't make this kind of prediction. Because,
Touche.
a lot of the capabilities are now. Having said that, I'm going to make a prediction.
Go for it.
Which is that you are very unlikely to be competing with a explicit AI twin of yours in 4 years or someone else's. I think the role of in the entry-level banking jobs, the entry-level consulting jobs, entrepreneurship, even software engineering to some extent, accounting, what constitutes a bulk of our work will still require humans. Now, the bigger question is, as we allow these generative AI systems to get better through our help to some extent at doing some of the things that an entry-level analyst does, will we need fewer of them? So I think the thing that I'm worried about is, many of you know this. I mean, a lot of the most coveted jobs that Stern graduates get after graduation are not the most intellectually challenging. They are pathways to wealth and to prestige. But you're doing a lot of spreadsheets, you're doing a lot of PowerPoint, not like you're sort of applying all that economics that you learned. You're not being rewarded for being in the top 10% of the class intellectually. You're being rewarded financially. And then after you pay your dues for a few years, you get the big bucks. The question that keeps me up at night is, could the same individual do twice the work because the AI tools are doing a lot of it for them? And if that's the case across the board, well, these companies just need half the number of people. I'm not going to make a clear prediction about that now, but to me it underscores the need to be one of those people that they want to hire, which means not just being really good at what you do and learning what you're learning, but also being adept at working with AI. And I think different courses have different levels to which they. That doesn't mean sort of have ChatGPT write your essay. That's totally the wrong way to think about this. But it is, getting good at figuring out what can the AI do to complement and make my work better. How do I ask the right questions of it in a way that sort of makes me get better output from it to complement what I do as a human than the other people can. I think certainly by the time you guys are looking for jobs, that kind of thing will give you an advantage. This is sort of moving away from labor power and into career advice. But,
but those topics align in this room, I think, to the extent that what we are here doing is trying to prepare people to exercise power in labor markets.
Yeah. Plus, when I was talking about Karl Marx, everybody was like, "Oh yeah." When we started talking about jobs, suddenly, like the heads came up. So
I share your perception.
Yeah.
Well, let's stay there. In the sense of, I mean, to the extent that, and again, this was, I think it was fall 23 when Foster Provost staged the
Spring 23,
the bot. He interviewed a bot for a master's level job at a position at Stern.
And the bot did pretty well. Yeah.
Right. That probably still exists on YouTube, doesn't it?
Yep.
I bet it does. But
ChatDS was the name of the bot.
Okay, so I remember then, Arun, asking you, why don't we just digitize ourselves now? We should do it sooner rather than later. I mean, the established market dominance.
I remember.
What have you? How have you? Your hashtag is digital Arun.
Yes.
Are you displacing yourself? You cultivating your digital twin?
Well, I'm, with the arrogance that is sort of like, customary in professors, I'm confidently going ahead and twinning myself, knowing that I'll still have value to add. I've done this for video. So like there is a system out there that you can type in things for me to say, and a video will be produced of me saying them. I have decided not to release that because it's sort of it worries me.
Yeah.
But that's a particular sort of visual kind of twin. There's a number of companies that will create our twins in the way that you and I talked about.
Yeah.
There's a pretty possible twin of Professor Damodaran that's already been built by a couple of my colleagues. It doesn't do as well as him because it can't spot the news that really makes a difference in valuing the company yet, based on what the person has said in the past. But I think everybody should explore it.
Yeah.
There's to me, the ideal world is one in which we have a way of asserting ownership over AI systems built with the explicit purpose of replicating us, right? And we have a way of asserting ownership over their output as well. Now, this way, I can use my AI twin as a complement. You guys might ask me questions. I may not immediately remember the answer or have the time to give them to you, but my AI twin will. And if I can use my AI twin to sort of stay explicit about everything that I had known and to scale myself, and with the guarantee that someone else isn't going to do that on my behalf without my permission, and that if we co-produce something or the AI twin produces something, it's mine. To me, that's the best outcome that we can reach.
Yeah.
We're nowhere near that yet. I mean, something produced by an AI system is in the public domain. It's owned by nobody, which is better than it being owned by the, by the technology company who sort of powered the AI. And, legislators haven't yet come close to drawing the boundaries around, there's, if you think about AI regulation, lots of governments have been looking for easy wins. Right? They want to be doing something about AI regulation.
Yeah.
The easiest thing is, the easiest two things, I think, are, if something is produced by AI, it should be watermarked as produced by AI. That's simple, non-controversial, largely doesn't make a big difference to the world, but it's easy sort of checkbox. The other is, so sort of attribution is one. And, sort of banning certain kinds of deep fakes, which is more important.
Yeah.
Is another. But there are all these subtle issues around ownership of my data stream, around ownership of my human capital, along with a whole host of others that nobody has really made a dent in yet.
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like we're sort of in a 2010 filter bubble moment. So in 2009 and 2010, when you guys were younger, a lot of academics had already recognized that personalization was going to potentially lead to polarization. That, these personalizing systems were in many ways gonna, sort of restrict the information that I have, thereby causing me to sort of reinforce my beliefs and potentially lead to polarization. There was a professor at University of Michigan, Lara Adamich, who then went to work for Meta, but she was writing about it in 2004. But Google personalized in 2009, and Elie Parissier wrote his book, his op-ed, The Filter Bubble, in 2011. And at that point, there was still time, to sort of say, well, maybe if we intervene now before the ad business model gets too mature, maybe we can, there's still time for policy intervention. But everybody started paying attention to it in 2015, 2016, when misinformation started to get really visible. But by then, it was too late. If you think about any political system, if there is an incredibly profitable business model that has been created, it's very hard to expect the holder of that business model to voluntarily step back. The board will fire them and say, well, I'll give up my ad revenue to sort of make the world a better place. Well, not Meta, because they've got a different corporate structure. But,
Right.
But in some ways, I feel that with the boundaries around human capital, we're still at the place where we can intervene. In 5, 6, 7 years, once we really notice it, once your AI twin is actually competing with you, by then it'll be too late. And so, a large part of the outreach that I'm doing at governments these days is around trying to get them to pay attention to, this question of how do we make sure that humans own their human capital.
Okay, so I'm going to go there, and I've got one more question for me, and then it's out to the room. So, and I want to pick back up. I mean, talking about you. I think the word you used was your arrogance in feeling like you'll be able to outrun your own digital twin. Maybe the same is true for Professor Damodaran. I'm frankly a little bit more concerned about that. I feel like higher ed as a field hasn't evolved too much from its medieval origins, so the risk of digital displacement in a place, maybe it's not an elite school like NYU, but other second and third tier institutions, perhaps the potential for disruption, I think, of generative AI in higher ed is significant. That's just me. I'm using my crystal ball in a way that you. But just to say, as you speak to people in government and to think about policies, what are the markets or industry sectors or areas of labor, business practice broadly, that you think policymakers should be most concerned about establishing those parameters for maintaining intellectual autonomy and basically the human dignity that comes with it?
Yeah. It's a tough one. I think that there's, the reason why I'm pausing is that a lot of people were convinced that truck drivers would be put out of business by 2025, the way autonomous AI was progressing in 2015. Maybe not city drivers, but truck drivers, highways. Highways are simple, once you get on there. And clearly, we're nowhere close to that now. So, the pace of change is always slower and sort of unexpected in terms of which particular professions are going to be more affected by AI than others. So I'm not aware of, I think software engineering, customer service, still retail checkout is still another one.
At risk of monopsony
Yeah.
disruption of
Yes.
the labor market. Yeah.
These are not surprising to any of you, but these are clear, sectors that we need to watch very carefully. But more broadly, I think we need to be looking out for a couple of things. You're all at an elite institution. You all know the admission rate is incredibly low here. You also know that you're getting more than just what Professor Statler and I are delivering to you and what your professors are delivering to you. The university degree is a complex product. You're getting brand, you're getting the clubs that are helping you discover what you're good at, you're learning how to learn, you're getting critical thinking, you're building an alumni network that is going to be really valuable to you. There's this rite of passage you're going through sort of in a celebratory way. The university degree is a complex and carefully designed through the market over 100 years product. And much like, when Coursera came out in 2012 and we worried about disruption, there will be some, but I think it's a solid product that can't be replaced by digital education at the level that you guys are acquiring it. To me, the need is that while we don't know which jobs are more likely to shrink, and I've looked at every study, I've participated in studies like this for 10 years, I can say confidently that there's no accountability in this system. People put out reports and then 3 years later it hasn't happened and they're like, well, let's put out another report. So I don't know which jobs are going to be displaced. But I do know that a lot of jobs are going to be displaced. And a lot of people who are 15, 20 years older than you guys, who are, say, in their mid-30s, early 40s, mid-career, are going to have to switch occupations. Like 10, 20 million Americans over the next few years are going to have to find a new occupation mid-career. And we have no educational infrastructure for this. We have reskilling, but we don't have something like the university that has a good bundle that gives them like discovery of what am I good at, learning how to learn, critical thinking, confidence building, mentorship, building an alumni network, a brand, placement services, rite of passage. It has to be done in a short period. They can't go back to college for 2 years or 4 years. So that's, to me, the biggest need. We needed this in the 80s and 90s when manufacturing was getting automated, and we didn't have it. And because of that, a lot of parts of the country have seen, opportunity shrink. I think that's in part responsible for the political polarization that we face. But just one final point, and then we'll open it up to questions. If you look at that manufacturing automation shift, there were other changes as well. There were trade changes. There were other technological changes that didn't just shrink the manufacturing labor force, but shifted it. it shifted it from the Midwest and New England to the South. So if you look at the South, like the southern region of the United States, like the census region, like that, the southern quarter, the fraction of the workforce that works in manufacturing has been somewhere in the 8 to 12% between 1960 and 2020. It's been relatively steady. For New England, it's gone down from 42% to 5%. So a lot of the jobs have shifted. So I think the work that is created for the people who are being displaced mid-career may not appear where they are, may appear in different places. So part of this transition also has to be about geographic mobility. Now, a lot of the places where the jobs are less likely to survive are also places that have experienced slow growth historically, places where large fractions of people have mortgages underwater. And so they are sitting on houses that they can't sell. If you can't sell your house, you can't move to a new job. So I think that's also got to be part of the equation, not just the training. So it's a far more complex product that we have to put together than the university degree. But if we don't, I worry.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what I worry about, but I worry, and now you guys can ask me questions.
We're going to go to questions. When you were saying, though, that factories moving from the upper Midwest to the South, I thought you were going to say the global South. And it occurs to me that we haven't yet, in speaking about AI and labor systems, really said anything about the rest of the world, where more than half of these people in the room come from. So maybe some questions about that. But it's over to you all for questions. And my sense with our, right there, we'll take one. Are those, what do we call these cubes now?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Can you can you throw them?
Yeah, it's a new thing,
okay,
just
good.
like that. There we go.
All right.
Your name, please, and a question.
Josh McFadden, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
So you mentioned how it's kind of unknown what jobs will be taken, but are there any jobs, or what jobs, if any, do you think inside and outside of business will be like safe from AI for our generation?
I'm parsing the question because, it's a good question. So in one sense, no work is safe from AI, meaning the mix of things that machines and humans do will change in every job. So to be competitive, you have to know how to manage that mix and how to sort of specialize in the things that the humans are going to do and use the AI systems sort of for the rest. There are kinds of jobs that you guys are not heading for, like, childcare jobs, elder care jobs, that are relatively safe. If you're a dancer, that's a fairly safe job. I don't expect people to be paying big bucks.
Percentage of the population is paid to dance.
And you're all training on TikTok, so clearly this was the TikTok plan to train our future workforce for sort of a safe profession. Now that having been said, I don't think you should. I don't think it's a good. I don't think people need to plan their careers by trying to project what's going to be safe from AI. I think you want to plan your career by saying things are going to change and I'm going to build the capabilities to adapt. Take more entrepreneurship courses, sort of spend these 4
Said the
years.
professor of entrepreneurship.
Yes, but it doesn't mean that you have to go out and start your own business. But if you learn the things that you learn to be an entrepreneur, they will serve you well in the more fluid, sort of occupational shift world. And so invest in flexibility, invest in, sort of critical thinking, learning how to learn. And, even in an uncertain labor market, sort of be reassured that you guys have, you're in a very small, rarefied fraction of the population in terms of your ability and in terms of your education. So I wouldn't panic anyway. I think AI is going to affect a lot of other people before it affects you.
Thanks, Josh. Question down front here, Chris, if we could.
Yeah.
How far does that thing fly?
How
Let's see.
aggressively do you toss these things?
Oh, that was
there
about
you
as
go,
much ground as we've covered.
Yeah.
I know your name, Mike.
Hi, my name is Michael Joseph. Thank you again for being with us. But I know that you hit on the arrogance aspect of like building your own AI twin, so to speak. But isn't that like folks in the sense of optimizing the AI twin for yourself and to match along with it, kind of like a paired growth as you're growing?
Well, it depends on the nature of the AI twin. I think there's, if I take the transcript of every YouTube talk I've given, everything I've written, and, embed that in a system that it's not just that, right? I mean, it's building on top of some general purpose system like GPT. That could be a good complement up to a point. If I give it access to my email as training data, and part of the reason why I will not do that right now is because these systems aren't yet able to figure out what part of an email message is me versus other people, and so it sort of adds a lot of noise. But that, I think, will add a lot. And then it's a question of how much am I going to invest into fine-tuning and sort of training it through, sort of reinforcement of, if I spend hours, asking it questions, getting its answers, saying, no, that was a bad answer, that's a good answer. All of that is, given the nature of the business that I'm in, it's a relatively safe path to go down because when people come to me for expertise, they're not just coming for the expertise, they're coming for the expertise coming from me.
So like the flavor.
Yeah. And also just brand, right? I mean, so again, not to sound arrogant and compare myself to Taylor Swift, but
Go for it. Go for it.
As a totally different example in a completely different league, if we trained an AI system to write songs like Taylor Swift, which is possible now, you could fairly easily create an AI system that writes Taylor Swift songs. It's not like this will put Taylor Swift out of business, right? A lot of people are going to say, yeah, sure, it sounds like Taylor Swift, but it wasn't written by Taylor Swift. And I want the song that was written by Taylor Swift and performed by Taylor Swift, and I want to see her perform, right? And so there's a mix of what is created and how much value are you adding to it that makes certain industries, like creating your AI twin, a safer bet in certain industries than others. And mine seems to not be sort of purely, well, if we can ask Arun Sundararajan's AI twin a question and we get the answer from that, then we don't need him anymore. So, in 20 years when I'm living on the street and, contacting you guys on LinkedIn and saying, hey, well, I actually got put out of a job by my AI twin. Maybe you will remember this plenary and point me to it, but hopefully not. Yeah.
We'll remember that. Got a question right behind you, Belle, and then we'll take that microphone from Mike back over there. Look at that. Yeah. Look at that. It's bouncy. Nobody's going to get hurt. Coming to you.
Thank
Your name, please.
I'm Abhi Viraj. I just had a question. The professor, you mentioned that if AI is used for any work, it makes sense to watermark it. While I agree with that completely, I was just wondering, the implications that come along with that. Because in today's day and age in society, there's a stigma that comes with AI where people think that AI work isn't qualitative or it's just perceived to be lesser. So what can be done about that?
Meaning if I'm using AI, like that the quality of AI work is lower?
I mean, there's a perception about that, I feel.
That what AI produces isn't as good as what a human produces.
Yeah.
That's true today. I think it's true in certain settings. You often think about it on, and this is something that, one of my PhD students is working actively on, but, you can think of something that comes out of an AI system along two dimensions. One is editability, which is once it comes out of the AI system, can you change it? Like an image generating system or a video generating system, the editability isn't that high. It's not like I can change it to look better easily. Whereas a text generating system, the editability is pretty good. Code generating system, it depends on how good you are. And on the other dimension, you've got verifiability, which is sort of like saying, let's say you're an investment banking analyst, and there's an AI system that's doing some work. Can the person you're working for just rely on the AI? They can look at the output and say, yeah, this is right. Or do you need the human expert there to, vouch for the AI output?
Yeah.
And so I think there are certain things where, like an image, a non-expert can look at it and say, yeah, it looks good. Text, you can sort of look at it. Like code, not so much. And so, I don't think that there will be a large-scale, sort of migration to let's rely on purely AI-generated output. But I think in some of the settings where verifiability is high, meaning I can just look at it and say it's good enough, and editability is high, because if it's not quite perfect, I can just sort of do it. Over time, the norm will just be that we use AI systems for these things. And that's not terrifying, because there are lots of things that we used to rely on humans for that we now rely on machines for. And other things, humans go off and do other things.
Yeah. Well, but again, that question is interesting, and your answer to it. I mean, the Taylor Swift thing, to think about, you could say edit a bot-generated Taylor Swift song. You could have the senior partner come over and say, yeah, that's a pretty passable Taylor Swift song. And then there's the irreducible authenticity of it's not Taylor Swift. Yeah. So that level of what is uniquely or human, or maybe impossible to commodify, or impossible to replicate, that would remain the purview of what will.
And in the Taylor Swift example, it's really because I've talked to a bunch of people like you about how much they would appreciate AI-generated music. And if it's something that you're listening to while you're on hold on the phone, they don't care. But if it's actually music that gives them joy, as opposed to, this is playing in the background on Spotify, a lot of people care about the fact that it was created by the person who they connect with, the artist that they connect with. And so that's unlikely to be replicated by, for anime, on the other hand, it seems like AI could displace a lot of artists, relatively fast, because there doesn't seem to be that much of a connection with the human creation.
Yeah.
All right.
One more question here, please. Yes.
Yeah. Make it a good one. It's the last one.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Sean. Thank you for coming here today to speak with us. I just had a question because earlier you did mention that if you had to make a prediction in 2 years, AI wouldn't take over completely. It would just be that we would have to work with AI. But what would you say would be the overall economical or societal impact? Would there just be a mass unemployment issue going around, or would it be more complex than that?
Good one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It is a good question. I don't think that there will be a mass unemployment issue. I think that there will be a lot of increase at the task level, in some sense, in how much a person can do when aided with AI. So we've seen already, you can edit documents faster. You can write code faster if you know how to write code. You can generate marketing content faster. You can generate graphic content. So task by task, I don't think that there has been a technology ever that has raised our task productivity so dramatically so fast. Just sort of like that. Now, there are two things. So you're saying, well, doesn't that mean mass unemployment? No, for a couple of reasons. One is that a 40% increase in my task efficiency doesn't correspond to a 40% increase in economic output. You know, things come together in complex economic systems and then lead to value. You know, the way in which the work that is done by different machines and different humans sort of come together in a product is then marketed. There's a lot of friction and there's a lot of coordination. And so, you know, when you see the news saying that, like, you know, AI can do things, makes us do things twice as fast, so there'll be half as many jobs, they're missing the point. The second reason why I don't fear mass unemployment in the near term, at least, is because even if a company can create a system that does things as well as their humans used to, the pace at which change occurs after it's technologically possible is often slow. So there's this notion of, there's this philosophy, I guess, for lack of a better word, technological determinism, which is that if it can be done technologically, then it will happen. So once cars can drive themselves, we will have self-driving cars on the street. That misses the fact that there's a whole bunch of other forces. There are political forces, there are social acceptance forces, there are other economic forces that can add anywhere from a year to many decades between the time that something's technologically possible and the time that it actually gets some sort of acceptance in society. And so an organization isn't just going to fire a bunch of people once the AI is performing well, because tomorrow the AI might be spouting nonsense, right? A client might say, well, if this was all generated by AI, I don't value it enough. You know, the client might say, I want human-generated legal opinions. I don't want AI-generated legal opinions. I want the human-generated legal opinions. People are slow to change. And so, and meanwhile, the economy is growing because there are, you know, this is the story of economic growth. You know, here are a couple of things to sort of reflect on, right? In terms of, because a lot of people will say, well, but what will humans do, right? We can't imagine what will humans do if the machines, you know, and I say, well, you know, 200 years ago, when machines, or 200 plus years ago, when machines started to automate factory workers in England, they probably had like, well, if the machine can, you know, create the garment, then what am I going to do, right? Now, that person couldn't have said, well, you know, there's this industry called healthcare that is going to emerge that will employ a double-digit fraction of the population because humans want to feel better and humans are in terrible health. Or there's this industry called tourism that will employ 400 million people worldwide because people are going to be traveling to other parts of the country and going on these things called vacations. So whenever there are unfulfilled human needs and things that used to require human time start to get done by machines, the humans will say, okay, let's start to fulfill these needs. So there are plenty of unfulfilled human aspirations on education, on health, on like, you know, sort of mentorship, on space travel, on there's a lot like, you know, on countering climate change. So I'm not worried about, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what will counter the reduction in the number of investment banking analysts or consultants. But I do know it will emerge, and the pace of change will be slower than the technological details will predict. And the new occupations will emerge. It's just hard to predict exactly what they're going to be.
The one and only, authentic Arun Sundararajan. Thank you very much.